On February the 16th, Dr. Karl Friedman, the Ombudsman, filed a report in the legislature which had as its conclusion that injustices had been committed on the face of the evidence in his possession to a number of contract loggers whose logs had not been properly counted in the Shoal Island log sort of BC forest products. And he made a strong case for that. But in that particular report, and I have the quote in front of me, or I had the quote in front of me, you said that the minister, documents on the minister's file indicate that in March 1983, the Minister of Forests asked one of my complainants to get the Ombudsman out of the investigation. Was that a mistake, an error, or bad information, Mr. Friedman?
The minister was asked to confirm or deny that information in the House on Monday. And the minister denied that he had ever made such efforts. When I heard the minister's statement, I immediately went back to the sources of information I had relied on and checked them out. And in the course of this check, it turns out that Mr. Mahood, who had made that allegation both in a letter to Mr. Waterland himself and later confirmed that statement in discussion with my investigator. Mm-hmm. He now, and this is some 9-10 months after the event, tells me that he was possibly confused because he had had discussions both with Mr. Waterland and Mr. Ray Williston. And he now says it probably was Mr. Williston who had, well, I shouldn't say probably, he says now it was Mr. Williston who made that suggestion to him.
Just to get that quite clear, therefore, you said documents on the file indicated that the Minister of Forests asked one of your complainants to get you out. You now find that there are no documents in the file.
No, there is. The document is there. There's a letter addressed to Mr. Waterland.
From what, Mahood?
From Mr. Mahood, saying, "Dear Tom, to demonstrate facts confirmed by 1982 scaling, I attach living color.
Right.
I am on the same side as you politically. I am asked to get the Ombudsman out of the investigation and control contractors until corrective action is in place. You can solve this problem to your advantage by following this action." And then he outlines how it could be resolved.
That's kind of embarrassing to you, is it not?
Well,
And in fact, you apologized to the House yesterday.
I went back to check with Mr. Mahood whether indeed he had been asked, and Mr. Mahood confirmed that. So I was in fact a victim of misinformation. You know, I had checked this very carefully. Now, the problem to me was that my statement caused all kinds of embarrassment to the minister in the House and in comments in the media. And when I found out that my information was erroneous and that Mr. Mahood corrected his information, I went back immediately to the House and informed the House that the information has changed and that I hoped that the correction of the information will go some way towards resolving the embarrassment that Mr. Waterland had suffered as a result of the publication.
Your sincere regret about the inconvenience and embarrassment this comment has undoubtedly caused him.
Indeed.
Now, there is a second point about whether or not you publish a report in the face of an RCMP investigation and after being advised of this investigation. But before I come to that, I think it'd be fair now to speak to Mr. Williston. Good morning, Mr. Williston.
Good morning, Jack.
Well, you were a very highly respected Forest Minister in the Social Credit government for how many years?
16.
So we now know that it was not Tom Waterland who asked Mahood to get the Ombudsman out of the investigation.
No, I suggested it to him.
Can you tell me the circumstances? Did Mahood come to you?
Well, Mahood, when they got into difficulties or realized they were in difficulties with their scaling, and remember, I've been through this many, many times before with contractors on the coast. This isn't the first time there's been trouble with scaling, and it won't be the last time there's trouble with scaling. And so they came to me and with their problem, and my immediate reaction to the problem, they said they'd taken the problem to the Ombudsman, and not that I have anything against that, but since I had plenty of experience with scaling, I objected right off the bat that they had taken this problem to the Ombudsman, because I contended that if they got all their facts straight and took it to the Forest Ministry. They were professionals, and every time I got into a scaling problem over the 16 years, red lights flashed all over the place, and we went to work on it. And I was absolutely sure that if they assembled the data, that they better not get a third party into it to get back to the Forest Service and get the god-darn thing straightened out.
In other words, you thought it was a straight Section 87 deal for a re-examination by the Ministry in the proper circumstances, and there was no need for the Ombudsman to be in it at all.
That was my view, and very, very strongly my view, that, and I suggested to them get their facts straight, and they went to Tommy Thompson, who is a very respected consulting forester, and he verified the facts on going over them concerning that, and his professional reputation's on the line, and it's pretty well worldwide, and I came to accept it for, in the time I was the minister, it never had varied, and I see no reason to vary it now. His whole professional reputation's there.
Understood. Your experience as the Forest Minister told you this was a matter which, were it properly handled by the Ministry of Forests, could be settled administratively without too much problem.
Well, I assumed you get it's just a numbers game, and you get the numbers out there, and you get the people who know enough about the numbers, and they'll resolve it. There's no need for anybody else getting in.
Right, so if the Ombudsman's report had said, an ex-Minister of Forests asked one of my complainants to get the Ombudsman out of the investigation, that would have been correct.
Yeah, and I listened to that letter that Mahood read, and he said, I have been asked... he was writing to the minister, and he said, I have been asked to get out, but I couldn't, listening to that letter, I couldn't see where he said that the minister had, he said, I have been asked to get out. I guess it could have been inferred insofar as as the Ombudsman. Although
your name is lower in the letter as a possible consultant on the matter.
Beg your pardon?
Your name is mentioned lower in the letter too, is it not?
I don't know. I haven't seen the letter.
Have you got that letter handy, Karl? You read it from a minute ago.
No, I only copied the first 3 paragraphs. The rest was technical matter.
I see. Fair enough. Well, do you think it's possible that the independent loggers, with your past experience, have been unjustly treated in this case, Mr. Williston?
Well, unless a fellow of the integrity of Tommy Thompson and some of the others are completely wrong, and I've never found them to be wrong, then I would say they have been. And from the evidence that I was able to see that was verified by Tommy Thompson, I came to the conclusion that they'd better get the god-darn thing straightened out.
And they haven't got it straightened out yet?
And they haven't got no, they haven't got the thing, and I was wrong. I said that if they put it up, they'd get it straightened out. Well, they didn't get it straightened out, so I'm the guy they can laugh at, and in this case, of course, it's all the more reason why the Ombudsman's there and doing his job.
And my thanks to you, Ray Williston, former Minister of Lands and Forests in the government for Victoria. Much obliged, Ray.
Fine, Jack.
And I'll continue with Karl Friedman, the Ombudsman, on the question of whether or not he was wrong in presenting his report to the House after warnings of some kind from the government after the break. Before we get down to the question of whether or not you were right or wrong in tabling that report, I think it might be a good idea to kind of spell out simply, and you correct me if I'm wrong, why the independent contractors were so upset. This was a dry land sort at Shoal Island, correct?
Correct.
And Mahood put in, without telling BCFP, his own scaler, a scaler.
Mahood came in after one other contractor dropped out. The other contractor dropped out because he couldn't make any money.
That was Percy.
Yeah. Mahood came in, and the first time he got a billing for the logs he delivered, he said, there's something awfully wrong here. And he then got in his own checkers. He kept very accurate records as to how much logs they normally deliver.
But I want to make the point that I believe he put in his own checkers without telling BCFP, and he found an 11% underscaling on the logs.
Somewhere between 6 and 20%.
All right. The second time, there were scalers from BCFP and Mahood.
Then he went to the ministry and said there's something wrong.
And that was 6%.
Well, there were several attempts, and the variation was quite great.
And then the third time, it was the ministry, Mahood and BCFP, and the variation was 3%.
Well, yes, that was one of the figures. Now, on those, there were several occasions. On one occasion, the scalers were not aware that they were being checked. And on another occasion, the 3% one, they were fully aware that we're being checked.
Now, let me get one thing quite clear. In your report, in any way, shape, or form, is there any suggestion of criminality or suspicion of criminality?
I have made it abundantly clear that in the entire course of my investigation, which has now been over a year, I have not come across a single accusation. As a matter of fact, before I decided my final recommendations to the ministry, I talked to Mr. Mahood and asked him very explicitly, is there any chance at all that there is something that I'm not aware of? Is there any suggestion at all that there's any untoward conduct? And Mr. Mahood, at that time, that was in December, said to me, no accusation whatsoever.
But unfortunately, on January the 11th, Mahood wrote to Larry Bell, the Deputy Minister of Finance, saying, if the allegation is correct, it would suggest there has been collusion to defraud. Is that not correct? That was the letter.
That apparently is the letter, and I have since received a copy of this after February 16th. Far be it from me to try and interpret this. I think you should really ask Mr. Mahood what he meant when he said that.
I hope so. But you were all set to file you delivered your report to the Cabinet Office on January 11th.
That's correct.
On February the 15th, what happened?
Well, before we get to the February the 15th, I should state that I made it clear in my letter to the Cabinet that there was an urgency to this case and that I was hoping that they would be able to attend to it as soon as possible. And further, I had communications with the Secretary to the Cabinet repeating that there was an urgency in the matter. The urgency was that several of my complainants were on the brink of bankruptcy and that this matter had dragged on for 2 or 3 years now and that there was urgent attention needed. So on February 13th, my solicitor advised the Secretary to the Cabinet that if we could not get a firm response from the Cabinet on this, I would have no alternative but to file the report with the Legislative Assembly soon. They asked me for an extension of 1 week, and I granted that under the impression that a resolution of the case would be forthcoming. When I realized that there was no resolution of the case forthcoming, at that stage I had to make a decision, a very difficult decision, on whether to table the report or to wait.
And the night before you were going to table the report, you got a letter from the Deputy Attorney General, Ted Hughes, in which he said that on January 26th, the RCMP had been asked to examine a matter about criminal conduct. Why did you not hold back the report on that letter?
Well, first of all, the Deputy Attorney General did not ask me to withhold the report. He did not offer any opinion on that. He did not offer any suggestion that the report might in any way interfere with any examination. I want to state very categorically that when I made my decision, I had very little information, and the Deputy Attorney General's letter to me was so vague as to leave me with virtually no information on which to base this decision. For example, there was any allegation of criminal conduct was not specified, so I could not tell whether that had anything to do with my report or not. There was no naming or even a suggestion that they had an accused person, not even a suspect. They did not even appear to have a criminal investigation. All I had was an assertion that there was a request for the RCMP to examine whether a criminal investigation
and
was
the
necessary.
RCMP, although the government knew about this allegation of fraud and collusion on January 11th, didn't send in the Mounties till a couple of days ago. And we don't know if they've seen the Ministry of Forests or not.
I went over the information that was available to me at that time, and I said nothing in my report deals with any criminal allegations at all, and I came to the conclusion that my report could be discussed by the Legislative Assembly without impeding in any way an investigation.
Just to come into the cause, Attorney General Brian Smith said you showed poor judgment and inappropriate conduct. Right? And outside the House, the Attorney General referred to your actions as highly irresponsible. Do you accept these, despite his amende honorable this morning when he says you apologized and everything's okay?
These two things have to be kept entirely separate. I expressed my regrets to Mr. Waterland about the embarrassment caused to him by that one comment. The rest of my report stands, and I am firm in my opinion that at this stage I had no cause not to table the report.
As the Ombudsman?
There were two reasons. Number one is that I had some complainants out there who were badly ailing and financially suffering and were on the brink of bankruptcy, and there was the possibility that this could delay my report and the government's response for months, if not years. There was no assurance. I got no assurance whatsoever.
Had there been an active criminal investigation with suspects, what would you have done? What have you done before?
Okay, I have had lots of experience with that. Many complainants come to me with criminal allegations, and I inform them that the right process is to go to the Crown, and either I send them to go to the Crown Counsel, that's the Ministry of the Attorney General, or I take it myself to the Attorney General. I have lots of experience with that. And the ministry knows that I've always played it straight by the rules. I've given them the information and I've suspended my own investigation. There was no question of my suspending an investigation. There was only a question of withholding a report from the Legislative Assembly.
Two more questions. Are you now finished with your investigations, including your addendum yesterday on the Shoal Island log sorting caper?
Absolutely. My report is finished. It's now before the Assembly. It's now up to the Assembly to act on it or to leave it.
You're non-political, but there's at least one social credit backbencher who wants your scalp. He was the guy who said you should fire everybody except the Ombudsman and 2 secretaries. Do you feel you have done anything to cause, not demand for your resignation, I anticipate at least once, but to cause you to resign over the Shoal Island caper?
I don't think I have anything to resign over. I think my actions were entirely correct, and in due course, I hope the Legislative Assembly will examine this very carefully and come to its own conclusion.
My thanks to Karl Ombudsman, the Friedman of British Columbia. Karl Friedman, well, he's the free man of British Columbia, you know. Karl Friedman, the Ombudsman of British Columbia. We'll be keeping in touch as developments occur. Next, Janis Johnson, the National Director of the Tory Party, after the break.
I was delighted to read, and interested to read, in the weekend press, Madam Speaker, the fact that the Prime Minister announced that he's not a quitter. I want you to know, sir, that we're behind you all the way.
The job was bad.
Janis Johnson is the National Director of the Tory Party of Canada. There must be no comparisons or snide remarks due to the fact that Iona Campagnolo is the National Director of the Liberal Party.
National President.
National President. Oh, you're only a director.
I'm a director, yes.
You're not as big as the President.
Well, it depends on how you define the role.
Who's the President?
Peter Elzinga.
Peter Elzinga.
Yes.
We don't know these people, you see.
The difference is that the President is elected at a convention and the director is an appointment of the leader.
Are you
personal appointment of the leader.
Are you're from Winnipeg?
Yes.
Are you a political animal, Janis Johnson?
To a certain extent, but it's not my whole life.
Yeah, but you're involved in political tactics more than anything else.
Yes, strategies, tactics.
Is there a deliberate campaign to get all of the old Joe Clark backers out of key offices in the Conservative Party?
Of course not. As a matter of fact, the objective is to encourage any people who supported whoever in the campaign, leadership campaign, to work with us, and that's work going along very well.
How do you feel about the reappearance of that wild-eyed fellow, that's a good, safe description, Peter Worthington, who upset a Mulroney machine, wham, bam, and going for that nomination in Broadview Greenwood? How can he get away with that? Does that mean you don't have a hold on the party organization?
You're assuming there was a Mulroney machine supporting Nancy Algie when it was, that's not exactly the case at all. The party establishment, so to speak, was not supporting any particular candidate. I think Peter Worthington learned from his defeat last April that he had to get very well organized, and he was, and Nancy will tell you herself, she was out organized. It was simple as that, and she won on the first ballot, and then a lot of her people left the hall.
But you and I would both agree, if we were not on the air, that obviously a much more desirable candidate, or maybe Mulroney wants Worthington.
You'll have to ask Mulroney.
Well, now that's one of the problems. Let me put it to you, as the National Director of the Tory Party. When are we going to get to speak to Mr. Mulroney?
Haven't you spoken to Mr. Mulroney?
No, Mr. Mulroney doesn't come west to speak at all. He only comes west to smile.
That's not true. I've heard he's made some excellent speeches out west.
Oh, I'm sure he's made some excellent
He
speeches.
won't come and talk to
He
you?
won't come and talk to the media because, do you know people want to talk about policy?
Of course. Well, do you want to talk about policy right now?
Yeah, we could talk about policy right now, but let's first of all get the... Is it not a fact that the policy of the Conservative Party at the moment is for Brian Mulroney to keep his mouth shut as much as possible so he doesn't put his foot in it
Not at
when
all.
the polls are so high?
No, Jack, not at all. Every time Brian speaks, Brian is speaking about the party and about where the party stands on a number of issues, whether it's in the House or on the hustings. And I think you have to make a differentiation between a campaign platform of policy and the kind of thing we're going through now. We're not going to obviously unveil our campaign platform any more than the Liberals are going to unveil their campaign budget. This new budget that just came down was certainly just a holding kind of operation. And
was it not a budget for the rich, that one?
I don't think it was a budget for anybody in particular, but if it was for anyone, it was inclined in that direction, certainly. No
Well,
question
you
about
asked
it.
about policy. Let me ask you a question about policy. Will you scrap the National Energy Programme at the earliest possible date and flog Petro-Canada?
You'll have to ask Mr. Mulroney, but I don't think so.
Where will you put the Canadian
I doubt
Embassy
it.
in Israel this time?
I'll keep you guessing.
Yeah, I know. It's quite good all to say. No, but seriously, what do you think of this character Trudeau and his performance yesterday? What do you think of him?
Well, it's like who's going to win the lotto? I mean, trying to assess what he's going to do or when he's going to do it is impossible. We really thought that Trudeau would have to make some decision about his leadership role by March. It's almost that now, just in terms of logistics, so the party could get organized for the next campaign. But I think he's perfectly capable of staying on and calling an election anytime he chooses. Tactically, they really lose any element of surprise if they go past June, and so I would think if he stays on, Jack, he will go before then.
What do your spies in Ottawa tell you? Has he lost the grip of the caucus? Is somebody about to bell the cat, or would he not tolerate such impudence from
He's
anyone?
still got a very strong discipline and control over his caucus. There are rumblings, but and I think they will increase, but it depends what he decides to do.
You see, what I was really getting at is that Mulroney, as far as we're concerned, there's not much doubt that we're going to go Tory and some NDP. I mean, you couldn't elect the Liberals.
Well, let's hope. Let's hope. It's the best thing for the country.
The Liberals are down the tube in
Yes.
this province, provincially and federally, so you don't have to work at that.
Yes.
But you're making Mulroney very remote. I mean, if you keep this up, Mulroney will be as well known soon in the province of BC as John Turner, which ain't very well known.
But he's been out here on several occasions and will be out here again. And increasingly, I would, be fair to say, increasingly talk about more and more policy as we gear up for a campaign. You've got to understand when you are in a pre-election phase like we're in, and the time has really lapsed. It was 4 years on February 19th since the last campaign. When you're into a fifth-year situation, you have to play things.
Right. How many seats will you win in Quebec? 20?
Oh, yes. 20, 15, 20.
How many seats will you win?
There could be more, but it depends on the mood of how the mood of the country stays. Also, who we're fighting.
That's right. Whom would you rather fight, Trudeau or Turner, the guy who went dancing with Princess Margaret?
It doesn't matter to us. We'll take any one of them on. But we'd be delighted to have the Prime Minister, and if not,
Where
Mr.
do you
Turner.
stand in the polls now? 46%, is it?
Who?
The Tories.
51%.
Drop.
Still.
51%. I thought you dropped a little bit
We
recently.
dropped 1%.
Now, what about the women's role? The Conservative Party, would you agree it's basically a stronghold of male chauvinist pigs?
It has been. We're changing that.
How many women are in key positions in the party?
We've got 5 or 6 women in key positions in the headquarters. We have myself and another woman, associate director. We have 3 women in key positions in the office of the leader. And we have several women in key positions on the campaign. So we are finally in key positions in each area that's critical to make where the power lies and where the decisions are made.
Janis Johnson, National Director of the Tory Party of Canada. What do you think of Mulroney? What do you think of Johnson? Are they just sitting back in the laurels knowing that Trudeau's going to be dumped? Have a bash at her after the break. Well, who knows what the telephone calls will hold for you. One of my favourite Tory MPs is Pat Carney, of course. You're lucky you got her.
Yes, I agree. We need more like her.
I hope you make her the Minister of Finance. Go ahead, please, to Janis Johnson.
Well, I know she'll do the job.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Yeah.
I guess that you're being a little soft on Janis Johnson this morning, Jack.
I'm always a sucker for a good-looking woman.
Well, I guess that's why the Tories sent her.
Chauvinism.
I think
Just a minute.
Nice
the
talk.
question is that the only policy that we're hearing from the Tories right now is elect us because we're different. What are they going to do about jobs, and what are they going to do about the $151 billion deficit?
Now, first of all, there are 3 points there. Because I said I'm easygoing on good-looking women, that's a chauvinist remark. You're joking. Is that not common courtesy and
Yes,
sophistication, couth and politeness?
Right. Okay, I'll
All right.
take it back.
Take it back. What are you going to do
For
about
now.
what are you going to do about jobs?
Well, the gentleman is asking a very large question. I'm not the policy development person. I'm not the policy person in the party. I'm the national director. I have a particular interest in women's issues. I can answer generally in terms of jobs that the thrust of a Conservative administration would be to economic responsibility, economic management of such a kind that we will be very fiscally cautious about where we spend money. We're not going to cut back on social programming necessarily to achieve this, but we feel, given the nature of the bureaucracy that's developed in this country, particularly in the area of crown corporations, and there is a lot of room for frugality and looking at budgets and cutting a lot of fat out of those particular areas.
What was your second question again?
The $151 billion deficit.
Well, you talked about fiscal frugality. Thanks anyway, old boy, for putting me back on my toes. I gather, therefore, that you like what Bennett is doing in British Columbia. He's sure using fiscal frugality.
Well, I think there are ways of doing things, Jack. And it's a lot of it's a matter of approach. I'm sure, you know, there's some good in every kind of action, and I don't think everything he's done is bad, but I think there's certainly ways of going about things. And when you're dealing with people, I think you have to be far more sensitive.
Good. Go ahead, please.
Welcome to Vancouver, Janis.
Thank you very much.
Tell me, how are the coffers of the Conservative Party in Canada at this stage of the game?
Well, the Conservative Party is in a solid financial shape.
Do you get paid for your job?
Yes, I do.
How much do you get paid?
Well, you'll have to ask the treasurer of the party.
Oh, they don't tell you?
Yes, they certainly do. Not enough, I can assure you.
Not
enough for the work I do.
Thank you very much. Do I recognize that voice?
Yeah,
Do I know that voice?
it's a liberal. That
Another,
must be a liberal
another
plant.
phrase. Yeah, that was obviously some liberal creature, person. Go ahead, please.
Maybe I should tell what I make. Everybody would then feel sorry for me.
Right. Iona Campagnolo is not shy about it. She wants the Senate seat because she deserves a Senate seat.
Well, I agree. I think she
And
does.
she gets, what, 50 or 60?
She'd be great in the Senate, yes. Along with all the other people he's appointed.
Senator Coles, for instance.
That's right.
Wasn't
and
that a
Marsden
beauty?
and
Grafstein. In fact, there won't be any place left in the Senate for you to put your old hacks.
I know.
That's a shame. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. It seems to me from the debates that I've seen and stuff like that Mr. Mulrooney is going to run the country much like Bennett is running the province. In other words, sending all the incentives in the direction of those in big business or those with the money. It seems to me that topics like women's issues and pornography, along with housing for new families and lowering taxes, are going to be very low on the priority list. What do you think of that?
Well, no, I couldn't disagree with you more strongly. Brian Mulrooney is nobody's person. He, in terms of the kind of government he will run, he's a very moderate individual who has as much compassion for people as he does for making sure that people have jobs. And that is going to be his thrust, and he's extremely sensitive at this particular time to women's issues and the concerns of women. And I can assure you, as one who's been through the party for 20 years trying to promote this kind of thing, that we are finally making tremendous breakthroughs at this time.
What's the women's issue that comes uppermost to your mind?
Economic equality, now that we have legal equality in the Constitution.
What about a simple thing like pornography? As an old-fashioned old guy, I just can't understand why we can't ban some of this
Well,
filth.
I agree, and that's certainly another thing that would be tremendously emphasized.
Why should we tolerate all this filth?
We shouldn't.
Unmitigated filth.
I agree.
But the Charter of Rights brought in by Pierre will allow every single bit of it, won't it?
All the rights.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yeah.
I'd like to welcome Ms. Johnson, first of all, and as a fellow woman and one who is looking at getting out into the working world and looking at leaving the home and going back to university possibly and looking for something that will lead into a job or a career in the future, can she tell me what sort of courses of education she would recommend for women to follow, especially ones who are interested in politics, interested in the economy and the country, and what are some of her qualifications and how did she get where she is, and what suggestions could she give us? I'm very interested to hear that, and I'll hang up and hear the answer.
Thank you, ma'am.
Well, I can start by commending you on the course of action you've decided to take. I think that's excellent. I spent years in the home myself and then went back and started back in the workforce, and it takes some time to get operative again. In terms of, I don't know what your education background is now, but if you're interested in politics, a political science degree, of course, in that, plus some graduate work. But as well, getting involved in a party and learning about the grassroots and the realities of politics as well as the theories of politics. I did do a lot of work at the University of Manitoba in the Faculty of Continuing Education with women on women's programs and women's studies, and I actually initiated a program for women such as yourself who wanted to come back to university and didn't know where to start, and the program was called Where to Start. I believe there might be some kind of similar thing in your Faculty of Continuing Education at the University of British Columbia. If not, you can always get the information from the other universities and proceed accordingly, but I think that you could get that information and see a counselor and get on your way, and again, good luck.
Well, how would you like to tell me a little story, which I snitched from Val Sears' column,
Val Sears,
when your father was the Minister of Education in Manitoba, is that correct?
Yes.
Did you or did you not form part of a small R radical group which occupied his offices?
Well, Val took a bit of poetic license. I was a student activist in the late 60s and vice president of the Students' Union, an elected position that I held for a year, and I was involved with the Canadian Union of Students as well. I vented my spleen quite well in student politics, and because I didn't find a home for my ideas in the traditional parties at that time.
But
we had a demonstration, and my father invited us in to make our presentation in his office, but he was so considerate and kind and gentle and affable that he took the steam out of our...
Yeah, but what about the court? When you got home that night, he glared at you and he said, "Damn it, Janis, when you learn to tidy up your room, I'll talk to you about running a university."
Well, that's Val. He got that a bit mixed up. A reporter came up to him on the steps of the legislative buildings and said, "Your daughter's involved in this demonstration. Are you going to speak to her?" And he said, "I'll speak to my daughter when she tidies up her room." That was the...
More with Janis Johnson after the break. Janis Johnson, National Director of the Tory Party, and a call from Micah Creek. Go ahead to Janis.
Yes, I'd like to ask Jack a question concerning the weights and measures, the metric system.
I can't.
What is the actual policies of the Conservative Party going to be when they get into power? And just, if I can add to that, I've been watching your channel, and I've been seeing that Big Brother seems to be slacking off a little bit concerning the metric weights and measures. We see more things in miles and pounds now.
Yes. What happened was, old chap, that there was a decision in court in Ontario, particularly in Ontario, saying it was not illegal to sell gas in gallons, and as such, the enforcement section of the Metric Commission, which is the commission itself is dying this year, is backing off on metric conversions in the future.
So
I think that's
is
right.
the Conservative Party then going to...
Bill Dom has sat here and said he wants to wipe it out. What they'll probably do is put it back on a
Bill
semi-voluntary...
Dom's view, and I realize that, but what is the policy, the implementable policy of the Conservative Party going to be? How are they going to reverse things?
Okay.
Well, I don't know at this time. I'm not in a position to comment on that, you know, whether they're going to eradicate the policy or not. I would agree with Mr. Webster there'll be some kind of moderation and sanity brought back to the whole implementation.
Go
of the
ahead from
program.
Campbell River.
Yes, Jack.
Yeah.
Janet, I'm a great friend of Brian Mulroney's. I grew up with him in Baie-Comeau, Quebec.
Oh, did you?
Oh, how come you're not a senator? How come you're not a big shot in the Tory party?
Well,
He will.
He will be.
we don't run the Conservative Party like that, Jack.
Oh.
That's
Not
right.
like the Liberals.
Uh-huh.
I'm 45 years of age, and I haven't worked for almost 2.5 years. I'm a tradesman. I'm an electrical consultant, and there's just no work anywhere for the Conservative, I guess. The way the slush fund has been going over the...
That's right. You're talking about the 76% of all the grants going to Liberal ridings. Isn't that appalling?
It is appalling. Usually governments, no matter what their stripe, try and divvy it out a bit more fairly, you know, because you have Canadians living in every constituency, not just 76%, but they've gone so far in their mentality that when it comes to patronage and partisanship, that it's totally unequal right now.
Tell me, what do you think of Mulroney, Colin?
I think he's a great man. I think he'll do a good job. I think he's the type of a person there that is concerned of everybody.
Okay, best of luck in finding a job. Damn difficult though it is in BC with our no-hope budget of the other day. Go ahead, please.
Janis?
Yes.
First of all, I would like to ask you, do you people support right to work, as I am a concerned union man?
I don't know that's a fair question for you, Janice. We're scared witless of right-to-work legislation. Many people are in BC.
I think it's, I'll stay away from that question this morning.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning. As a Canadian voter, I perceive both the Conservatives and the Liberals as the Bobbsey twins. Throw in the soccer at provincially and you got triplets. When is the Canadian voter going to get smart, vote for the NDP, the only party for the little guy, and not for the rich?
Well, I hope they'll get smart and vote for the Tories because, after all, you look at the history of this country, we've had very few governments other than liberalism, and I wish you luck in the future, but I think the time has come for the Conservative government.
They'll be wasting their vote, ma'am. It'll just be another vote for give bucks to the big conglomerates, put more people out of work.
Well, I respect your political party.
Well, it's not name-calling, it's objective, ma'am. This is what's happening. This is what will happen.
I respect what you believe in, and I'm just trying to tell you what we believe in.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, Jack.
Morning.
I've been hearing a lot in the press lately, in the media, that the Clark and Mulroney camps have been squabbling amongst themselves. How do they expect to unite this country if they can't unite together themselves?
Yeah, what about the unity of the party? Because just the other day I saw a quote.
I'm very glad you asked that question because I think it's been played up in the media to be something that it isn't, quite honestly. We have united as the party has never been united in its history under Brian Mulroney, and Joe Clark was be the first to tell you that he is totally behind Brian, and the party has never experienced such party discipline, such party unity. You're talking about a few dissidents in the Toronto area who are not team players, and there's very little the party can do when the press decides to play up that aspect as opposed to generally the party being totally united.
Yeah, after the convention there was a fair solidification.
There was. It took time over the summer. People had to come to terms with the fact that their person had lost perhaps, but the party has been at all levels, if you go right down from the caucus, the leader, the caucus, the executive, the grassroots, the organizations in every province. You'll see tremendous cohesiveness.
Because of the prospects of power looming.
And also because of the ability of Brian Mulroney to bring people together and work with people in a very civil fashion.
Go ahead, please. Where are you?
Yes, good morning.
Morning.
Question to your guest.
may I respectfully suggest that the Progressive Conservative Party is a party of contradictions, and that starts with the name Progressive Conservative. Progressive states very clearly that you're in favor of political and social reforms, while conservative means that you're opposed to change of any kind. How can you reconcile that? And you have a pompous, pusillanimous, puffy-cheeked pussyfooter from Newfoundland who's stating that elect us, and then we will tell you what our policies will be. Well, we're not buying a pig in a poke. I'd like you to...
Well, just a minute. I want to get
talking about who's this person
well,
from
just a minute.
Newfoundland?
Pompous, pusillanimous...
Pompous, pusillanimous, puffy-cheeked pussyfooter.
Who's that?
Puffy-cheeked... That's Crosby.
Oh,
but it's
John.
not... the word is pusillanimous.
That's an excellent alliteration.
Isn't it? I think we'll leave it at that. Some people you can't convert, Janis Johnson. You must understand that British Columbia, we've got some good, tough, hardcore NDPs, and then we've got a bunch of lily-livered liberals and Tories who flip back and forward between Bennett
Well,
and the
variety's the
Tories.
spice of life, Jack.
We have lots of spice
That's
here.
right.
Well, when June? Oh, you're talking about a convention for years, do you?
What convention?
The leadership convention.
No way.
My thanks to Janis Johnson. Next, we're going to go under the water with Phil Nyutten of CANDIVE after the break.
Thank you, Jack.
I want to say good morning to my special guest, who is the leader of the Rhinoceros Party of Canada. Good morning, sir. How are you? I'm very well, thank you. What is your political platform? Who gives a damn? Today's silly moment. Phil Nyutten of CANDIVE staggers in here with his 100-pound monstrosity and tries to tell me it's a great new wonderful Canadian development with which you can fly underneath the sea. Is that correct?
Well, it's not correct, but I tried to tell you anything, Jack, after listening to the last few guests. Yeah, this is a new sort of a hard wetsuit, if you want to call it that, that allows a diver to go down to 750 feet and stay down there for hours and not have to decompress.
Right, just a minute. I said 2,000 feet. I was wrong. 750 feet.
This particular model.
What is the diving level for aqualung scuba gear?
It's not safe, it's not generally considered safe below about 130 feet.
130 feet. Well, but this is like a modernized version of the old canvas, heavy gear.
Yes, that's right.
Diving.
It looks
suit.
much like it, but the old heavy gear suit, the helmet gives the impression of great strength, but the suit is flexible, so the diver's at the same pressure as outside water. In this suit, he's protected from the pressure.
At 750
yes,
feet?
He feels no pressure at all, just like we're sitting here.
Can he move?
Yes.
Well, artificial arms or his own arms?
His own arms and legs.
At 750 feet, therefore, he can walk around up to that depth and have fair mobility.
Yes.
Before we get down to what we're going to talk about, have we got some ENG on this, Pat? Let's see the ENG, the film on this suit in action. Where are we now? Can you tell me? Have we to do a voiceover on this? Okay, this is obviously in a very cold climate. It's up there. What's happening?
This is up in the Canadian high Arctic off Beachy Island, about 50-odd miles from the magnetic North Pole. And we're getting ready to dive the WASP suit, which is a forerunner of this nude suit we have here, and is in fact good to 2,000 feet. And this is my swollen body being forced into the suit. Not actually forced into the suit. The ice is 8 feet thick, and we'll be diving in water that approaches freezing. In fact, it's slightly below freezing. It doesn't freeze because it's salt water, and diving onto the wreck of the Breadalbane, or Breadalbane, depending on your pronunciation. I'm going to ask you about that later, Jack. The Breadalbane is one of the supply vessels during the search for Sir John Franklin in the 1850s. It was lost under the ice, or nipped in the ice in the 1850s, sank to the bottom in Lancaster Strait. We found her there last year and dove on her.
In other words, it was this suit, the previous one to this, which took you down to the Breadalbane, or Breadalbane, which you found in remarkably good condition. Is that correct?
That's correct. Here we see the WASP, this is WASP 3, going through the brash ice in the ice hole, through some 6 feet. It's a very tight fit.
Are you in that?
Yes.
There you go.
Just a couple of bubbles to mark the trace. This is at a depth of about 300 feet, about 100 meters. And you see that the WASP flies on the end of a tether using powerful thrusters or propellers. And this is the wreck itself, the top of the wheelhouse of the Breadalbane. And I was very thrilled on this dive to be the first person in 130 years to touch her deck.
That's incredible. Was it in a good state of preservation?
Absolutely excellent. The wood, because the water is so cold.
For whom did you do this incredible undersea find?
This was a joint venture between the McGuinness Foundation and our company CANDIVE Services with participation of National Geographic. This is the first artifact recovered from the wreck, a small, looks like the interior of a block, one of the rigging blocks.
Is that your hand, your mechanical hand?
That's actually a small remote control vehicle.
What's that?
This is the instrument house on the back deck of the Bralban. We're coming up onto one of the compasses inside the cabinet. All of the lamps, dividers, navigational instruments were still intact.
Fantastic. Have you brought all these instruments up yet?
No, the only thing we brought up from the wreck were a few wood samples, some samples of the copper sheathing, and the ship's wheel.
I hate to ask you, did you find any bones?
No, everybody got off okay. As a matter of fact,
yeah. What's that?
That's a large Arctic prawn.
How long were you down? How long can you stay under in that?
Well, this suit has a life support for 48 hours, but in those freezing conditions, after about an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes, the inside of the dome started icing up and my wool started freezing to the inside of the suit. So I figured it was time to come on up.
The only thing you haven't got is a coal and wood stove to keep you warm inside this monstrosity.
I certainly have used it.
Now, when are you going to start to raise the Bralban?
Well, that's a good question. There's been a lot of controversy about that. There's a ship's wheel, which will be raised in a sec. That's the steering wheel that steered across the Atlantic into the high Arctic. The problem is that the fastenings of the vessel have gone soft through electrolysis. The wood is in good shape, but the fastenings are soft.
What do you mean the fastenings?
That is the bolts, drifts, etc., that fasten the wood together.
So therefore you're liable to take it apart the moment you start to take off the steering wheel or any other artifact.
Very possible.
It's not like that Norwegian ship, which
the
Swedish,
Wasa.
The Wasa. That was Sweden.
That was buried in the mud, and the metal was well preserved and the wood by the mud.
And the Mary Rose in London.
The Mary Rose also in the mud.
This one, therefore, can't be lifted as a complete...
No, but it can be taken apart as a jigsaw puzzle and brought up and reassembled on the surface.
And is that on the plan yet?
It's one of those things. We're talking to Conservation Canada and the Parks Board and whatnot about that.
Is this part of your show? I mean,
this is part of the show that will be on Saturday night at Eric Hamber's School and tomorrow night at the Robson Media Center. It's called The Descent, and it's a underwater film festival come seminar that describes a lot of the advances in commercial diving as well as sport diving over the last few years.
Now, obviously, you took the old divers, what do you call the old diving suits?
Hard hat, heavy gear.
Heavy gear diving, and you modernized it.
Yes, essentially. But again, don't miss the critical point. The heavy gear suit has the same pressure on the inside as the outside. The helmet could just as easily be made of cardboard as of metal because the pressures are the same. This suit resists the pressure completely. The wear inside is at 1 atmosphere, no matter what the outside pressure is.
And you are connected by life support systems?
The life support system is self-contained, exactly the same as an astronaut's pack.
You mean you go down without a tether?
We have a tether, but it's strictly a strength wire and a location wire. It has plays no part at all in life support.
And you can come up as fast as you wish to without getting the bends?
That's right. In 1975, we made a dive through 16 feet of ice in the high Arctic into 1,000 feet of water using this type of suit. And we were on the bottom for 6 hours and came back up in 7 minutes. Had it been conventional diving equipment, it would have taken us 8 days of decompression to come up.
That's fantastic. Who invented this?
This was originally invented in 1937 by a chap by the name of Pop Perez in England. And these are just modernized versions of the work that was done in 1937.
More with Phil, pronounce your name Nyutten.
Nyutten.
Spell it in a very funny way.
Yes, Sir Isaac would be very upset, but it is pronounced
Nyutten or something.
Probably.
But it's Phil Nyutten for our purposes. Hey, questions to Phil, calls to Phil, more chatty poos with Phil after the break. What do we call this? Wasp?
This is called a newt suit, believe it or not, which is a rather bad pun on my last name and the aquatic salamander by the same name.
The newt suit.
Yeah.
Now, can this, obviously it's got great uses in salvage operations.
Yes, very much so. Primarily the use will be offshore oil support off the offshore rigs, such as the one that had problems last night. That's the sort of work we do normally. We work across Canada using equipment much like this to support offshore drilling.
How about the recovery of minerals from the sea floor, the seabed, which was a great shtick at one time?
I think that, like all these things, it suffered from a bit of a backlash from the initial publicity. But like mariculture and aquaculture, subsea mineral harvesting or mining will be certainly a thing of the future, no question about it.
What about the use in other atmospheres? This is for use in water only.
Well, it's kind of interesting that we've had a lot of interest from NASA in this particular development. One of the problems with the current suits that are being used off the shuttle that you see on the TV and whatnot is the soft suit won't tolerate high pressures, and they have a problem with the pressure in the suit now. If they inflate it any more, go to higher pressures, the suit becomes rigid and won't bend. They're looking very hard at going to a hard suit, which is this is, of course. And one of their problems is to find mechanical limbs, joints that will flex under the high pressures inside the suit in space. They have problems with 8 pounds per square inch. This suit is designed to operate at 350 pounds per square inch. It's fully patented, and obviously NASA is very interested in those patents.
Silly question, but this would not have any weight in space at all.
Not at all.
Nothing has any weight in space.
Well, the suit would be made much lighter for space, for one thing, and of course it weighs nothing.
Yeah, but you've got lesser air pressure in space.
That's right.
As you say, 8 pounds against 350 pounds.
That's right. So it makes it, for my purposes, it's much easier to design a suit for space than it is for underwater.
In other words, any idiot could, I don't mean that, but any unskilled person could go into that suit, go down and come up again.
That's correct, yeah. All you have to do is breathe and
but
talk.
You're relying on normal, how does it swim?
Well, the joints are articulated.
Oh, you've got little jets in the back.
Yeah, well, it has jets on it too, but the joints, the arms and legs are articulated, and you can swim with flippers just like a regular scuba diver.
No weight in it. At that time, there's no weight in it. Question to Phil Nyutten about the Newt suit. Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could tell me if there's any differences between this suit and a gym suit, and where you would get any kind of training in the lower mainland for this sort of thing, or whether you have to go back east for it.
Well, the gym suit is a forerunner of this type of suit. It's very cumbersome, weighs about 1,100 pounds, and it requires a crane to lower it into the water. It doesn't swim. We've tried swimming. It doesn't swim worth a damn, as a matter of fact. This is much smaller, lighter, more dexterous. Jim has about 20-25% of the normal diver dexterity and manipulative capability.
But this ain't available for no amateurs yet, no?
Not at all. In fact, the first sea trials of this prototype will be this summer. I would expect that training will be available probably within a year of the suit coming on the market, and I would hope that it will be here in Vancouver and possibly back east.
Training for professional use?
That's correct.
But all these scuba creatures will all want to do this.
Well, a lot of them do. There's a tremendous amount of interest in it, and all the various symposiums that the sport divers and scuba divers go to, they show a lot of interest in it.
Silly question, but if you were buying one to use in your swimming pool or whatever, what would it cost you?
A suit like this would run something like $100,000.
Is that all?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Nothing.
Yeah, if your business expense, at least you can deduct it.
Exactly. It's certainly deductible.
And don't let the income tax snoops let you see it in the pool.
There's always a chance of treasure, too, so make your investment
Hey,
back.
have we any gold around here?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Are you planning anything?
Possibly when I get old and long in the tooth. I have a couple of treasure possibilities in British Columbia that I'd like to look at.
Spanish galleons?
No, Spanish galleons, but some just as interesting. Some gold and some base metals that are certainly there. Whether you can find them or not is a different story.
Yeah, Florida's a place for that, isn't it?
Yes.
Jesus, the phone's gone funny again this morning at the same time. Go ahead, please.
Yes.
Yes.
A question for Mr. Nyutten. I noticed in his film a jellyfish and, as he called an Arctic shrimp swimming by. And I was wondering what search has been done on how they can withstand that pressure with no problems, it seems.
They have no air spaces. If you were totally fluid, you wouldn't have any problem at that depth either.
That's right. If you had a gill system and no air spaces in your body, you could go down as deep as you like.
No problem at all. That's correct.
That was a silly question. Was it?
Yes.
No, it wasn't a silly question. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I was wondering how much, they're going to start to cost her.
$100,000 if you want one to play with. No, they're not practical for you, ma'am. Besides, you're too young anyway.
Okay.
Cheaper in pairs.
Cheaper by the dozen. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yeah.
How much of this new suit owes its development to the work done by the ship, the Artiglio? You remember the Italians who did a lot of this after the First
I remember it
War?
very well. In fact, very little. The system used on the Artiglio was the Kunke and Neufeld German system, which is entirely different than the fluid-supported joints that were developed in England some years later.
And what was the name of the Englishman who developed this?
Joseph Perez.
Correct. Very clever man.
Yes, he was.
The Italians at one time were the best underwater people, were they not?
In the Second World War.
World War.
Yes.
They were very good with the scuba divers and the limpet mines.
That's correct.
In fact, I think it was the only thing they did well in the Second World War.
That's very possible.
Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Phil. I'm a sport diver, and I'm interested in taking that new course at UTS in North Van.
UTS?
And I was wondering what my chances are getting any work after I finish.
Well, I'm not terribly familiar with UTS. I understand there is a new school opening in North Van called Underwater Technology School.
But let's go this
I'm not
way and say,
familiar with
what are the career opportunities for professional divers? How did you get your start?
Oh, gosh. I started so long ago there weren't very many professional divers around in Canada. Today, the workforce in Canada is primarily offshore oil-oriented in the Beaufort Sea and off Hibernia.
Do you have to have a government license to go down?
Yes, you do. The regulations for commercial diving offshore Canada is governed by COGLA, the Canadian Offshore Gas Lines Administration, and the requirements, the permits, everything are very, very stringent.
Phil Nyutten of CANDIVE. Tonight, where is it?
It's at the Robson Square Media Center.
No, February 24th.
I'm sorry, that's tomorrow. Yeah.
Tonight is somewhere, you said.
No, tomorrow night at the Robson Square Media Center, and then Saturday at Eric Hamber School.
Tomorrow night at the Robson Square, Saturday. I'm very impressed. Thanks very much, Phil, for coming in this morning. I feel like he's an old political friend who unfortunately has now gone to Senate and says as much in the Senate as he ever did in real life. The Newt. Senator Newt. I'll be back with a free-for-all after the break. You want to go on the air? Hold on, please. You want to go on the air? Hello? Okay, hold on, please. Okay, time for a free-for-all this morning, but I must tell you, first of all, you know about the dramatic rescue of 76 workers from the oil rig, where am I? From the oil rig that blew up off Shoal Island. Jim Hart on the New News Hour will have coverage via satellite from the East Coast on the most dramatic rescue of these 76 workers. Jeez, oh. However, things keep happening. This morning was, I thought, quite bright, especially the Kissinger speech last night. I got to tell you, it was a very good speech. It was kind of pragmatic and practical common sense, and the whole thrust of his speech was, the United States has not yet learned the basic elements of international diplomacy, the power struggle. What is essential for any major power is the knowledge of the balance of power. In other words, he was explaining backwards some of the arrogant things the United States does. He says, on occasion, to protect the balance of power and not be at the mercy of anyone, a major power must make an assessment of the possible risk and act right or wrong. If they feel they don't act, they're liable to lose the balance of power. And the Brits did it for 100 years, and the French and the Russians before the United States. And you must remember, the United States only came into being as a world power in 1945. One of the other interesting things he said was, you know, all this garbage, I'm paraphrasing him, about Andropov. He says, don't you realize that we never knew that the public didn't even know that Andropov was married until he died? And he said the Soviet Union is like a massive corporation where the only way to get promotion is when the oldest joker dies. And then you move in. And he says, don't think that Chernenko didn't try to get Andropov's job before Andropov got it. And he says, in the Soviet Union, they have a choice between a bunch of 72-year-olds and some young fellas in the 60s. The trouble with the United States, he pointed out very graphically, was that every time there's a presidential election, it's 15 months before they know what their foreign policy is going to be. And that what the U.S. must have, he said, is a bipartisan policy which is constant between the Democrats and the Republicans so that the rest of the world knows what the policy is going to be. He made a lot of common sense, something which Harcourt has lacked in his recent behaviors, and it would have done Michael good had he been forced to sit in the corner with a dunce's hat on, listening to Kissinger. 20,000 bucks? Well, it was worth 20,000 bucks because it leaves about 90,000 left over for the Arts and Sciences Technology Pavilion on the other sponsors. Yeah. Oh, yes, we're on the air. I thought I'd finished. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning.
Morning.
Yes, 2 points I wanted to mention. First one, after listening to the fisherman's complaint, it would be interesting to see after the herring season, which starts next week, to talk to a number of the fishermen who are going to make between $50,000 and $100,000 in cash. I'd like to see what their comments are. And secondly, I find it very strange that there was a lot of commotion and interest in Kissinger's visit, and yet you can't get that kind of response excuse me, when the government comes in with their policies, unemployment and so forth. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Matter of fact, there was a discussion among some friends last night about who they might bring in for the next World Affairs dinner, who would pack in 1,020 people at $150 a head. It's very difficult to think. There's certainly no Canadian who could pack in 1,020 people at $150 a head. There are very few Americans. Teddy Kennedy would probably bring out the curious Chappaquiddick followers. Maggie Thatcher would pack the place. And that's about it. You know, somebody that people would rush to see to pay $150 to hear. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I was reading in the paper this morning about Henry Kissinger's visit, and there was pictures of people trying to crawl on cars that they thought possibly would hold Mr. Kissinger. And I just want to say that he's a very great man, and those people should be ashamed of themselves, because he has a right to come and visit Vancouver and has a right to walk around on the streets like you and I would.
Once the example was given by Mayor Harcourt of that silly gauche snub of Kissinger, you could have expected anything last night. That's what, you know, it's Harcourt's fault.
Yep.
No doubt about it. Harcourt to blame. He'll have to answer for it one day. And I like Michael. You should hear what I say about him when I'm mad. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, hello, Jack.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm phoning up regarding this.
Is that Jimmy Sloan?
No.
No. Okay. Carry on.
About the welfare.
Yeah.
Single persons. And I'm just wondering why they can't do like they did with me.
What's that?
Well, I was in a car accident and I was unemployed at the time.
Right.
I was getting unemployment insurance, and because I wasn't able to look for work because of my serious injuries, they wouldn't pay me. ICBC wouldn't pay me the $100 a week because I wasn't working, so I ended up going to welfare. And they made me sign a consignment to pay them it back when I get my final settlement from ICBC. Now, why can't they do this with the employable single people?
You mean sign a consignment?
Yeah, sure. And then when they find work, get their employer to deduct it from their wages at, say, 10% or whatever.
Well, first of all, they can't do it legally because the federal government lays down the rules for the application of welfare under the Canada system.
Well, how can they do it with me then?
They did it with you because the regulations say you can't draw unemployment insurance if you're not fit and available to take a job.
Right.
ICBC were dragging their feet, perhaps rightly or wrongly, on your claim, and they couldn't give you the $100 a week because you did not have an income at the time. This is one of these legal technicalities.
Yeah, I realize
Thirdly,
that.
I suppose, therefore, that welfare was quite generous to you in saying you can have advances, but you must pay us out of your ICBC settlement.
Yeah.
You're the guy caught in the middle.
Yeah, but, you know, they could easily get something passed with the employable person. You know, if somebody was going to get it deducted from their wages, they wouldn't go looking for welfare. They would find a job at $3 an hour or $4 an hour. You know?
Yeah, I know what you mean. You're on the right track, but we're so used to welfare and guaranteed incomes, even although they are minimal, that people won't accept that attitude anymore.
It wouldn't cost them any more money because with the sales tax, they pay the employee, the person who's collecting the sales tax, 3% for collecting it. You deduct 3% before you send it off to the provincial government.
Anyway, nice to talk to you. Thanks for your experience. Have you recovered from your accident?
No, not yet. I still have to get my leg taken off.
To what?
I have to get my leg taken off.
Oh, my God.
It isn't healing like it should.
And didn't ICBC give you an advance payment?
No. Every time I go to ICBC for taxis or...
Hold on. I'll be back after the break. Hold on.
Okay.
Eric Nielsen, Tory MP from the Yukon tomorrow morning. And Simone Bibeau, who apparently has quite a considerable authority on children with learning disabilities. Oh, and don't forget to watch Jim Hart on the satellite rescue pictures of the 76 who were saved at Sable Island. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. precisely.